Thank you for choosing American Pest CEUs. Hi, I'm Sean Reeves. I'm an Associate Certified Entomologist with American Pest CEUs. I've been in the pest management industry since 1999, and I'll be your instructor for today's course. Today's course was compiled by Jack Launius, who has served in the pest management industry since 1990. Pesticides in the environment, off-target sites, bees and other pollinators, fish, birds, and other vertebrates, and where do pesticides go after your treatment? Pesticides in the environment. The objective is to understand the types of damage that can occur to plants, animals, wildlife, soil, water, and air, understand the typical ways that pesticides are broken down or move within the environment, understand what pesticide drift is and what factors contribute to pesticide drift. Understand why it is important to protect water sources and the recommended practices that are necessary to protect water sources. Understand the importance of protecting crop pollinators and what laws and regulations are in place to protect crop pollinators. Understand what management practices may be used to lower any negative impact to fish and wildlife. Drift in the environment. Equipment configuration and operation determine spray droplet size. Small droplets are most likely to drift off target and are produced in greatest volume when using small nozzle orifices and high pressure. Select the correct nozzle type and use a spray pressure low enough to produce the largest droplets that will provide sufficient penetration and coverage of the intended target. Drift potential is also increased as the distance between the nozzle and the target increases, so application should always be made as close as possible to the target. Many pesticide labels include directions that prohibit spray application of the pesticide under conditions that favor drift. Complying with these directions requires an understanding of weather conditions that enhance drift. Drift in the environment. Drift can be defined simply as the movement of a pesticide through the air to a non-target area. There are two types of drift: particle drift, vapor drift. Particle drift refers to small spray droplets carried by air movement from the target area during the application. Any pesticide applied with a sprayer is susceptible to particle drift. The most important factor in drift minimization is applicator attitude. Small droplets and high equipment operating pressures can provide better spray coverage, but also produces large amounts of very small droplets that are susceptible to drift. Spraying, when it is convenient, and disregarding existing weather conditions will often result in off-target pesticide application, leading to inconsistent pest control and possible damage to adjacent crops or properties. The many factors that influence the amount of drift are discussed in the following sections. Of primary concern are spray droplet size and wind velocity. Although there are several other factors that can affect the off-target movement of a pesticide, most of the problems associated with drift can be avoided by paying close attention to the droplet size being produced by the sprayer and the velocity and direction of the wind. Let's think about drift. What could we do to make sure that we're not applicating when the winds are too high? Well, obviously we could watch the weather, right? As you can see here, sometimes you're going to get a great forecast, like a low wind forecast, I would call it. So if you've got winds in the 3 to 6 mile per hour range, that the majority of products you use would be safe. Now always read the label, and obviously if you're dealing with things like dust, you could have problems no matter what type of wind there is, if there's any wind at all. But the point we're making here is if you've got a good low wind forecast, that's a great time to do your application. On the contrary, how many times have you looked and seen the forecast like this? I wake up in the morning, I look at the forecast, and I go, wow, by 9 a.m. today, those winds are going to be 40 miles per hour or above 40. Maybe by later in the day, they start to go down to 30. But this is really not a good day to do pesticide applications outdoors. They have the potential for drift. I also noticed something else on this forecast, that by the time I get to the weekend, those winds are going down to 10 miles per hour. So the timing of your applications make a lot of sense there, as long as you follow the fact that you really don't need to do outdoor applications with drift potential on Thursday, but if we wait till Saturday, maybe we can make sense out of it. Obviously, a lot of us don't want to work the weekend. We might have to push some things even into next week. But my point to you is, if you look at the weather and you look at it several days ahead, a lot of times you can see there's always going to be times that are better to put pesticides out. We can't restructure our whole life, our whole jobs, and I understand that. But just be wise about looking at the weather and the forecast just to see what's going to be your best times to put the product out. As droplet size increases, the potential for drift decreases. Because of this, it is desirable to operate a sprayer so it produces the largest droplets while providing adequate coverage of the target area. However, as droplet size increases, the volume of water required to give the same degree of coverage also increases. Vapor drift. Vapor drift refers to the movement of pesticide vapors from the target area. Some pesticides are volatile and can change from a solid or liquid form into a gas. A gas or vapor when the pesticide may drift farther and for a longer period of time than spray droplets. Pesticides with a high volatility are most susceptible to vapor drift. A pesticide in a gaseous state can be carried away from a treated area by air currents. The movement of pesticide vapors in the atmosphere is called vapor drift. Unlike the drift of sprays and dust that can sometimes be seen during an application, vapor drift is not visible. Some herbicides can volatilize and move from the treated area, reducing the control of the target weeds and increasing the likelihood that non-target plants will be injured. Vapor drift. Application of a volatile pesticide should be avoided when conditions favor volatilization, such as high temperatures combined with low humidity. The vapor pressure rating of the pesticide may help indicate the volatility of the material. A higher vapor pressure means that the pesticide is more volatile. Volatilization can be reduced through the use of low volatile formulations and soil incorporation of the pesticide. Precautionary statements on labels indicate pesticides that have a potential for vapor drift. Wind velocity and direction. Wind speed is the major weather condition affecting drift. The greater the wind speed, the greater the drift. In general, wind speeds below 5 miles per hour pose very little drift hazard. In fact, some pesticide labels require minimum wind speed to avoid temperature inversions. Nearly all the spray particles will have a chance to deposit on site before moving too far off. When wind speed increases above 5 miles per hour, drift does become an important factor and must be considered. Generally, wind over 10 miles per hour will control and carry virtually all smaller particles and will affect medium and large particles. In general, winds are usually less just before sunrise and just after sunset. Air is usually the most turbulent during mid-afternoon. Pesticides should not be applied when wind movement is toward an adjoining property. Buffer zones should be increased as winds increase. Several other factors influence the potential for drift. Wind velocity and direction. Physical properties of liquids. The viscosity of a liquid is a measure of its resistance to flow. For example, mayonnaise is more viscous than water. As the viscosity of the liquid is increased, the droplet size of the spray increases. Thickening agents can be added to the spray to increase droplet size, thereby reducing the time a droplet is suspended in the air, thereby reducing the chances of it drifting. Thickeners are used to reduce drift of sprays. They may contain polyacrylamide, polyethylene, polymers, polysaccharides, long-chain sugars, or vegetable oils. These products not only help volatile pesticides become less volatile, they also cause the carrier solution to become more viscous and heavier. Using thickeners can be helpful in cases such as when doing commercial applications near a residential housing development. While reducing the drift, the downside is the fact that thickeners have the potential for damaging foliage when applied at too high of a dosage. Wind velocity and direction. In addition to thickeners, a number of drift control agents are now available that reduce the potential for drift. They include foam additives, invert emulsions, and others. Research with ground sprayers indicated that the addition of a spray thickener reduced spray drift by 66 to 90%. However, some post-emergence herbicides require small droplets for optimum performance, so techniques that increase the droplet size of an herbicide may reduce weed control. Always follow the label directions regarding the use of any spray additive. Wind velocity and direction. Humidity and temperature, low relative humidity, and/or high temperature increases the evaporation rate of water spray droplets, thereby shrinking them before they settle. Evaporation reduces the size of spray droplets, thereby making the smaller droplets more susceptible to drift. Droplets greater than 150 microns are not significantly affected by evaporation. Adsorption is the binding of one type of molecule, e.g. solute or liquid, to another molecule, e.g. soil. Pesticides absorb to soil particles. The amount and persistence of pesticide absorption varies with pesticide properties, soil moisture content, soil pH, and soil texture. Soils high in organic matter or clay are the most absorptive. Coarse sandy soils that lack organic matter or clay are much less adsorptive. The increased absorption of soils high in clay and organic matter is due to an increase in soil surface area, thus the number of binding sites for chemicals. Absorption by plants and microorganisms is another process that can transfer pesticides in the environment. Once absorbed, most pesticides are degraded within plants. These residues may persist inside the plant or be released back into the environment as the plant tissue decays. Absorption. Runoff is a process that moves pesticides in water. Runoff occurs as water moves over a sloping surface, carrying pesticide either mixed in the water or bound to eroding soil. The amount of pesticide runoff depends upon the grade or slope of an area, the characteristics and texture of the soil moisture content, the amount and timing of irrigation or rainfall, and properties of the pesticide. For example, a pesticide application made to a heavy clay soil already saturated with water is highly susceptible to runoff. Established vegetation or plant residues also influence runoff because of their ability to retain soil and moisture. Absorption. Runoff from residential and recreational areas or industrial sites can be a factor in pesticide pollution of surface waters, streams, ponds, and lakes. Pesticide residues in surface water can cause injuries to plants and animals in aquatic systems, contaminate groundwater, and result in livestock and plant/crop losses to downstream users. Herbicide runoff into non-target areas can damage sensitive plants. Pesticide losses from runoff are greatest when heavy rainfall occurs shortly after a pesticide application. Pesticide runoff can be reduced by careful observation of current and predicted weather conditions. If heavy rain is expected, the application of pesticides should be delayed. Irrigation should be applied in accordance with labels and instructions and monitored to avoid runoff and accumulation of excess surface water. When applying pesticide treatments for parks, recreation areas, or homes, the site supervisor or homeowner should be advised to turn off sprinkler systems until the treatment areas are completely dry, or longer if label requirements have specific guidelines. Absorption. When treating brooms, careful attention should be made to what's at the bottom. Notice if there are sidewalks, city sewer systems, floodwater, or storm drains that could potentially be contaminated if lawn sprinklers are ran, or if there is a possibility of rain. Soil that has standing water, puddles, should never be treated with pesticides. Leaching is a process that moves pesticides in water. Several factors influence the leaching of pesticides, such as water solubility of the pesticide, soil texture, and absorption. A pesticide that is dissolved in water can move readily with the water as it seeps through the soil. Soil structure and texture influence soil permeability, as well as the amount and persistence of pesticide absorption to soil particles. Adsorption is probably the most important factor influencing the leaching of pesticides. If a pesticide is strongly absorbed to soil particles, it is less likely to leach regardless of its solubility unless the soil particles themselves move with the flow of water. Absorption. Groundwater contamination is a major concern associated with the leaching of pesticides. Keeping our water safe is the responsibility of everyone. As a licensed PMP, pest management professional, you should always set an example of environmental stewardship. Prevention is the best remedy to minimize groundwater contamination. There are many factors that contribute to water contamination: pesticides, domestic waste, sewers, landfills, industrial waste, even government-produced radioactive waste. As a PMP, you should only apply pesticides when and where necessary, and only in amounts adequate to control pests. Using pesticides only when necessary and using only the minimum amount necessary for effective pest management will help to minimize potential groundwater contamination. Protecting groundwater. Use an IPM, integrated pest management. Combine chemical control with other alternatives to minimize the use of pesticides. Consider the type of soil you are treating. Soil texture is determined by proportions of sand, silt, and clay. In sandy soil, percolating water moves faster, and there are fewer binding sites available for the absorption of dissolved chemicals. Soil organic matter influences how much water a soil can hold and how well it absorbs pesticides. Increasing the soil organic content increases the soil's ability to hold both water and dissolve pesticides in the root zone where they will be available to plants. The susceptibility of the particular soil type to leaching should be determined prior to using pesticides with the potential to contaminate groundwater. Protecting groundwater. In the selection of the product you use, always try to choose pesticides that are highly soluble, relatively stable, and not readily absorbed to the soil tend to be the most likely to leach. Choose pesticides with the least potential for leaching into groundwater. Follow all label directions. The label is a law and it carries critical information you need to know about the proper application rates, mixing, treatment areas, including areas to avoid. When using products that require dilution, mix the correct amount for the job. Adding more doesn't kill pests any more dead, it just wastes chemical and adds to the increased possibility of off-target contamination. Protecting groundwater. Calibrate your equipment. If you are using a half-gallon, 1 gallon, or larger compressed air sprayer or backpack, you still need to know how much is being applied at how many seconds using each tip at a consistent pressure. Most chemical supplies have 1 gallon measuring cups you can purchase for use in calibrating. As an example, a spray wand with a cone tip versus pen stream will put out different amounts of liquid in the same time period with the same pressure. You should always select the correct nozzle size and pressure for the application you are performing. Bees and other pollinators. Restrict the application of pesticides that are toxic to bees and other pollinators when weeds and flowering plants are in bloom. Pollinators are very important to our environment. From a food standpoint, about 1/3 of the food we eat requires pollination. Do not apply pesticides that are toxic to bees during bloom. Even shade trees and weeds should not be sprayed when blooming. Select the pesticide least harmful to foraging bees. Check the product labels for specific bee hazards. Bees and other pollinators. Select the safest formulation. In general, dust are more hazardous to bees than sprays. Wettable powders are more hazardous to bees than either emulsifiable concentrates or water-soluble formulations. Granular insecticide formulations are generally the least hazardous, while microencapsulated formulations can be quite hazardous. The hazard to the bees increases when the material can be carried back to the hive. Since microencapsulated and dust formulations are picked up with pollen, they are the most dangerous because they can affect the brood as well as other adults fed by the contaminated pollen. Fish and other vertebrates. Pesticides can be harmful to all kinds of vertebrates. Most recognizable are the direct effects from acute poisoning. Fish kills often are a direct result of water pollution by a pesticide. Pesticides can enter water via drift, surface runoff, soil erosion, leaching, and in some cases deliberate or careless release of the pesticide directly into the water. Fish kills are most often caused by insecticide contamination of small ponds or streams with low water volume or turnover. Fish and other vertebrates. The following practices can minimize negative effects to wildlife caused by improper or unnecessary pesticide application. Use pesticides only when necessary. Select the least toxic and least persistent pesticide that will do the job. Observe the environmental precautions on the label. Treat only the area needed. Avoid aquatic areas whenever possible. Leave a buffer zone between bodies of water and the treated area. Avoid spraying trees that overhang streams or ponds. Exercise caution when placing baits or granules. Clean up any spilled granules or completely cover them with soil. Be aware of the legal considerations when using pesticides. Very strict laws have been enacted to protect pollinators and wildlife, especially endangered species. Birds. Birds killed from pesticides can occur in many ways. Birds can ingest the toxicant granules, baits, or treated seed. They may be exposed directly to the spray. They may consume a treated food source. They may drink or use contaminated water, or they may feed on pesticide-contaminated prey. Animals often mistake granules or pellets for food. Pets, birds, and other wildlife can be killed when the baits are left unattended or improperly placed. Granule pesticides are particularly attractive to birds since they are often mistaken for food. In the current photo, you're seeing where do pesticides go. The reality is you have a pesticide spray up above the soil. Now these pesticides can evaporate or volatilize as you see here and go upward. Also, they're going to be going down into the soil surface, into the root zone. They're going to get down to the water table eventually, so you can see the percolation, the leaching, all the way down to the groundwater. Now, obviously, we've got issues with drift, as you can see, if the wind's blowing, whatever the case may be. But also, we've got precipitation. So, rain, things like that, can actually take the pesticides and run them off down into surface water, as you see on the right. We also have photodegradation, where the sun itself, the UV rays, are breaking down the pesticides. And as you see right below the soil level, we have the uptake absorption. So this just gives you an idea of where pesticides go after you put them out so that you can understand how they could have different impacts on the environment. Where do pesticides go? Any off-target pesticide is a pollutant and can harm animals and/or the environment. Many pesticide labels list environmental effects, such as contamination of groundwater or toxicity to pollinators, birds, or aquatic organisms as reasons for restrictions. The environment compromises everything around us. It includes not only the natural elements, but the word environment most often brings to mind, but also people and the manufactured components of our world. The environment is also not limited to the outdoors. It also includes the indoor areas in which we live and work. Anyone who uses a pesticide must consider how that pesticide affects the environment. The applicator must ask two questions. Where will the pesticide go in the environment after it leaves its container or application equipment? What effects can this pesticide have on non-target sites, plants, and animals it may reach in the environment? A spilled or mishandled pesticide may enter the environment without ever being applied to a target site, while pesticides that are applied properly can enter the non-target environment in a variety of ways, such as volatilize, turn into gas from treated surfaces, rinse off a treated surface and enter the soil, be carried laterally by runoff or soil erosion, leach laterally or horizontally through the soil, overspray. Overspray is the application of a pesticide beyond the boundaries of the target area. Overspray can occur indoors and outdoors. Drift. Drift is the movement of a pesticide in air currents or by diffusion onto property beyond the boundaries of the target area. Drift may occur either as a solid or liquid particles or as vapors. Pesticide drift, like overspray, often implies a lack of due care on the part of the applicator. You are responsible for confining pesticide applications to the target area and for taking precautions to prevent unwanted exposure to persons or property of others. Runoff. Runoff and/or leaching can occur when pesticides are carried off the application site into waters such as rivers, lakes, and streams, wells, storm sewers, or into groundwater. Runoff occurs on the surface while leaching occurs below the surface. Leaching can occur vertically or horizontally. Pesticide characteristics. To understand how pesticides move in the environment, you must first understand certain physical and chemical characteristics of pesticides and how they determine a pesticide's interaction with the environment. These characteristics are solubility, adsorption, volatility, and persistence. Understanding these factors will help you determine not only the risk a pesticide application poses to the environment, but whether or not the pesticide will remain at the site of application long enough to be effective. Solubility. Solubility is a measure of how easily a chemical will dissolve in a solvent, usually water. Pesticides that are highly soluble in water dissolve easily. These pesticides are more likely to move with water and surface runoff, leaving the application site quickly and possibly contaminating nearby areas. Highly soluble pesticides can leach downward through the soil, potentially contaminating groundwater. Adsorption. Pesticides may settle or attach to surfaces such as soil, called absorption. They vary in their degree of attachment. Strongly adsorbed pesticides are less likely to be carried from the treated area by water runoff or to leach through the soil into groundwater. They may, however, more readily by soil erosion. Volatility. Some pesticides are volatile. The volatility of a pesticide is a measure of its tendency to turn into a vapor or gas. Volatility increases as temperature and wind increase and humidity decreases. As a pesticide turns into a vapor, it can drift and cause problems downwind. Persistence. Persistence is the ability of a pesticide to remain in an active form in the environment. Persistence may be either desirable or undesirable when the objective is long-term control. A persistent pesticide with residual activity may be desirable. Persistence and residual activity are often used interchangeably. Persistence beyond the time it is needed, however, is undesirable, and the remaining pesticide is usually referred to as its residue. The longer a pesticide persists, the more chance it will have to remain active when it moves from the target site. Degradation. Degradation is the process of pesticides breaking down into simpler and often less toxic compounds. Pesticides vary substantially in their susceptibility to degradation and are broken down by the environment in different ways. As you can imagine, photodegradation happens when the sun shines on a product. Those UV rays are going to break down the product. The chemical itself can be degraded as well by things like rain. So as you can imagine in that scenario, the rain is going to dilute the product because the product is definitely going to be soluble. Also, as the product goes down through the layers of the soil, you're going to have microbial degradation. Basically, the product itself is going to break down in the layers of soil. So that kind of explains degradation, at least on a simple level. Pesticide accumulation in animals. Pesticides that end up off-site can cause harm to people, plants, and animals in various ways. The following section discusses how pesticides get into animals and water sources, even when neither appears to be present at the site of application. Bioaccumulation. Some pesticides can accumulate in the bodies of animals, including humans, particularly in fat tissue. Instead of the body getting rid of the chemicals as waste, they are stored in fat tissue and build up or accumulate over time. This process is called bioaccumulation. Because of this long-term accumulation, these pesticides can sometimes reach harmful levels, even though the animal or person only ingests a small amount at a time. Biomagnification. Biomagnification occurs when the pesticide moves up through the food chain. A food chain is the sequence of plants and animals that feed on each other. For example, microscopic plants and animals in water take up a pesticide. Small animals eat those plants, and fish eat smaller animals. Larger fish eat the smaller fish, and a bird of prey or human eats the big fish. At each level of the chain, the organism eats many of those below it, e.g. a largemouth bass will eat many minnows. This is how a pesticide becomes increasingly concentrated as it moves up the food chain, with each level getting a larger dose, magnifying the effect. With this process, an animal at a higher level, e.g. a bird of prey or a human, can become poisoned without ever directly being near the pesticide application. To summarize, bioaccumulation occurs when a pollutant builds up in concentration within a species, usually by absorption from surroundings, air, water, or soil. Biomagnification occurs when pollutants are magnified through the consumption of food, starting with the lower food sources to higher level organisms. Biomagnification occurs between species and is closely related to predator-prey relationships. A tenfold increase in contaminant concentrations has been noted in tissues from prey to predator. With bioaccumulation, you can see, as we're showing here on the chart, you have the fish. Small fish start absorbing the pesticide through what they eat, through the water, whatever the case may be. As each bigger fish eats a smaller fish, it accumulates more and more. So they're getting the cumulative effect of eating the fish that's smaller than them. And then you can also see that as it goes up the food chain, you get all the way up to the bird. The bird is going to get the biggest part of the biomagnification because it's going to eat the largest fish that's got the most pesticides in it. I think this is the easiest way to articulate bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Groundwater. Everyone who uses water from a well uses groundwater. Groundwater is water contained in the cracks and pores of rocks and the space between sand grains and mineral particles underground. Once groundwater becomes contaminated, it is difficult, if not impossible, to do anything about it other than to stop the source of contamination and allow enough time for the level of contamination to decrease. The best solution is to prevent contamination in the first place. As you can see on the current chart, we're showing a well underground. You can also see here that we're showing the water table, the unsaturated zone, and then we've got some gravel in a saturated zone. The point of what we're saying is, as the pesticides or whatever the pollutant may be works its way down through the soil, eventually it's going to work its way down through the unsaturated zone, gravel, to the saturated zone, which is the aquifer, and of course at that point it's coming right up through the well into their drinking water. Surface water. Pesticides can reach surface water through sewers, in runoff, or in contaminated groundwater that is discharging to surface water. Be aware that conditions that reduce the threat of groundwater contamination may increase the threat of surface water contamination. For example, pesticides that strongly absorb the soil particles may not leach downward into groundwater but may be carried into surface water if runoff causes soil erosion. Runoff into surface water is likely if the soil is crusted, compacted, or frozen, particularly on sloping sites or applying on or near pavement that may drain to a sewer. Sources of water contamination. Surface or groundwater contamination results from either point source or non-point source pollution. Point source pollution comes from a specific identifiable place, such as pesticide spills entering a storm sewer, back siphoning, repeated spilling of pesticides at mixing and loading sites, careless spilling of wash water at equipment cleanup sites, improper handling of spills and leaks at storage sites, improper disposal of containers, rinsate, and excess pesticides. Non-point source pollution comes from a widespread area. Runoff, seepage, and leaching from areas of application take the pesticides into areas it should not occur. Health and economic cost of water contamination. The human health impact of pesticides in water sources depends on the chemical present, the amount that is in the water, and the amount of water that a person drinks or come into contact with over a period of time. To avoid health problems, federal and state drinking water guidelines for pesticide residues set limits on the amount of contamination that may be present in drinking water. The costs to society of pesticide-contaminated water are difficult to quantify. Losses of pesticide chemicals through leaching represent lost investments by the applicator. Contaminated groundwater can be very costly to the communities and families that rely on it for drinking water. For example, when household well water has levels of pesticides exceeding health standards, the family must get water from another source. This leads us to a question. Are pesticides in drinking water an issue? Well, according to a National Water Quality Assessment Program study in 2021, atrazine was found in 57.9% of drinking water samples in Maryland and 87% of drinking water samples in a sample of 12 Corn Belt states. The point of what we're making here is you definitely know just by looking at the studies that pesticides in drinking water are an issue. And if you think about it this way, especially if you're doing lawn and ornamental applications, you really have to think about how much of the product you're putting out, where you're applying it, making sure you're following the label, but also what's the weather like. Because if you're putting out at a time where there's going to be rain, especially heavy rain or things like that in the near future, you're contributing to this problem. And as you can see by the graph on the right side of the screen, as more and more people put these pesticides out, as the population grows into more and more areas, we can become a part of this problem because we are out applicating with pesticides every day. So keep in mind, you really need to think about this when you're out there applicating, and you definitely want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Contamination. Factors affecting ground and surface water contamination. The factors that influence whether a pesticide will reach groundwater or surface water after normal use include the characteristics of the pesticide itself, conditions at the pesticide handling site, and application practices. To prevent spills or poor pesticide handling, the following label guidelines regarding the proper transport, storage, mixing, and disposal of pesticides. Some key steps include securing pesticide containers in the back of a vehicle to prevent spills during transport, storing pesticides over impermeable floor and checking frequently for damaged containers, storing bulk pesticides in secondary containment, mixing or loading pesticides only over an impermeable pad, using an air gap or backflow prevention device when mixing pesticides, disposing of pesticide waste properly. Always keep in mind the label is the law. Protecting the environment is everyone's job. Being part of the IPM solution. The IPM approach to pest management differs in several ways from conventional or traditional urban pest control that relies primarily upon pesticide use. First, it is not merely a reaction to a pest problem. It is a process which, when followed, provides effective control. Second, it considers threshold levels of pest presence. The third difference between conventional pest control and the IPM approach is the application of two or more pest management procedures to reduce or limit population levels. A fourth difference is that the pest management involves a truly integrated approach where all pests are considered in the development in the pest management process. Included in this portion of the course is sanitation, mechanical control, cultural control, chemical control, and the evaluation of the effectiveness of your plan. In recent years, the term Integrated Pest Management and its own acronym IPM have received much press in the pest control arena. There have been dozens of articles written on the subject during the past decade. It has been heralded as the new approach to pest control. Those who have been less than encouraging have generally cited its lack of acceptance by the pest control industry. Neither view is correct. Integrated Pest Management IPM is neither a new approach to pest control, nor is it practiced by only a limited number of pest management companies. It predates recorded history and is practiced universally. The inspection should be an orderly, organized procedure to determine the above information. It should include all areas of the premises, both indoors and outdoors. All levels of the structure should be inspected, including attics, living or public floors, basements, crawl spaces, etc. No areas should be overlooked because an infestation may have its beginnings in such an area or may be, because of favorable conditions, move into this area. Inspection. The first step in any IPM program is a thorough inspection. There are several reasons for inspecting the premises, including determine the location of the infestation, determine the extent of the infestation, note damage to the structure or commodities, determine conditions conducive to the infestation, identify harborage areas, identify sanitation deficiencies, identify avenues of possible entry, identify items or factors which would impact the program development. Identification. Before an effective integrated pest management program can be developed and implemented, it is necessary to know the pest or pests with which we are dealing. Identification is an integral part of any IPM program. The knowledge enables us to determine what control measures to employ and when, where, and how to employ them. Without a thorough understanding of the pest and its habits, habitat, life cycle, and biology, we cannot be effective. In addition, several states require that any chemical applications performed before a specific pest and that this pest be listed on the treatment record. While the customer can often identify many pests by general categories, such as cockroach, fly, beetle, or rodent, they are seldom able to make a more specific identification. Such specific information is necessary so the proper management program can be developed. The reason for this is simple. Even though two pests may be of the same group or family, cockroach, fly, etc., their food, shelter, and habitat requirements may be different. In addition, the damage they may cause can vary greatly. Similar-looking beetles, for example, may damage wood members, stored products, carpets, and houseplants. Each would require a different control method. It is important, therefore, to assure that the proper identification is made. Once a pest has been correctly identified, its food preferences, harborage sites, behavioral patterns, biology, habits, potential for damage, and options for control measures may be determined. An important adjunct to identification is submitting information detailing when and where the collection was made and the name of the collector. Establishment of threshold levels. The concept of threshold levels originated in the area of agricultural pest control. The pest population levels at which control measures are undertaken are called economic thresholds and are based upon the value of the commodity or its anticipated market value, the amount of damage the pest population could cause, and the cost associated with implementing particular pest control measures. Establishment of thresholds. Although the cost of potential control measures in an urban setting can be determined, it is difficult to assign a value to the economic consequences of an infestation. For example, while the presence of cockroaches in some locations within a facility may be tolerated, their presence in the food preparation or consumption areas would not. Consequently, in this case, the threshold level would be 0. Occasionally, a pest management decision may depend upon the cost of potential control measures as weighed against the benefits received. Establishment of threshold levels. The concept of threshold levels originated in the area of agricultural pest control. The pest population levels at which control measures are undertaken are called economic thresholds and are based upon the value of the commodity or its anticipated market value, the amount of damage the pest population could cause, and the cost associated with implementing particular pest control measures. Although the cost of potential control measures in an urban setting can be determined, it is difficult to assign a value to the economic consequences of an infestation. For example, while the presence of cockroaches in some locations within a facility may be tolerated, their presence in the food preparation or consumption areas would not. Consequently, in this case, the threshold level would be 0. Occasionally, a pest management decision may depend upon the cost of potential control measures as weighed against the benefits received. As a result, urban pest management decisions are generally influenced by three factors: health and safety, danger created by the pest, legal restrictions on pest infestation, the levels of pest tolerance exhibited by the customer, employment of two or more control measures. It is at this stage of the pest management process that we see the true integrated approach come into play. The primary objective of an IPM approach is to design a program that uses more than one strategy or control measures. Least disruptive of natural controls, least hazardous to human health, least toxic to non-target organisms, least damaging to the general environment. The strategies chosen should be ones that are most likely to produce a permanent reduction of the pest population, easiest to carry out effectively, most cost-effective over the short and long term. Mechanical. Mechanical or physical control involves the use of traps, caulks, seals, or barriers to prevent pests from entering, establishing, and living in an undesired location. It may include any or all of the measures listed on the next slide. Mechanical includes excluding pest-proofing pests using barriers, including screens, seals, nets, and caulking, manually removing pests using hand snares or by vacuuming, setting traps including sticky, electric, light, multiple catch, and snap types, the use of heat or cold to destroy pests. Cultural. Cultural control involves the manipulation of the pest environment to make it less favorable for the pest to exist. It may also be referred to as habitat modification or environmental alteration. To accomplish this, the customer may have to change some of their normal practices or habits and thus make it harder to the pest populations to become established or spread. Biological. Biological control is the use of parasites, predators, or pathogens to control or manage pests. When available or sufficiently developed, biological control strategies tend to be among the least environmentally disruptive pest control measures. Nematodes, fungus, parasitic wasp, and even IGRs are all examples of biological control agents in the urban arena. Evaluation of effectiveness. The final step in the integrated pest management process is the evaluation of effectiveness. Follow-up inspections enable pest management professional to assess and adjust the control measures that have been employed. There are several reasons for re-inspecting the account. Determine. You need to determine the effectiveness of previous procedures. Identify areas overlooked. Eliminate any entry points. Enhance program effectiveness. Reapply or revise. Reapply or revise any pest management procedures as appropriate. Maintain good customer relations and satisfaction. The IPM template. The IPM template is a formula with which the pest management professional can determine the appropriate control measures to use. It may be expressed using the formula account type plus pest minus restrictions equals control measures. The key components of the formula are the account type, the pest or pests for which control is desired, and any restrictions imposed by various factors, including the customer, environmental, and legal restrictions. The result is the appropriate control measure or measures to be employed. You have completed Part 1 of this course on pesticides, the environment, and IPM. Please continue to Part 2. Characteristics of herbicides in vegetation management. Herbicides are essential tools in controlling unwanted plant species, commonly referred to as weeds. Weeds can be hazardous along rights-of-way, impacting safety, infrastructure maintenance, and local ecosystems. These areas often encompass roadways, utility corridors, and other public spaces where vegetation management is necessary. Effective weed management in these settings can prevent reduced visibility, damage to infrastructure, and disruptions to the ecosystem. Moreover, weeds in these spaces may be considered invasive, detrimental to other plants, or a threat to human and animal health. To develop effective weed management programs, professionals employ herbicides, alongside other vegetation control methods. This section outlines the critical characteristics, terminology, and functions of various herbicides used in right-of-way vegetation control. Key herbicide terminology and concepts. Understanding herbicides requires familiarity with various terminologies and concepts that help professionals choose the right product for specific applications. Here are some key terms to consider. Absorption method. This refers to whether the herbicide is absorbed through leaves, foliar, or root soil. When it comes to activity type, herbicides can be contact or systemic in their action. Looking at target plants, they can be selective, targeting specific plants, or non-selective, affecting all plants. When we look at mode of action, this describes how the herbicide disrupts the plant's internal processes. Active ingredient, also known as AI, the chemical component in a herbicide responsible for its weed-killing properties. It is essential to review the AI when selecting a herbicide, as different AIs have varying effectiveness on different types of weeds. Formulation refers to the specific mixture of active ingredients and inert substances in a herbicide product. Common formulations include emulsifiable concentrates, granules, and wettable powders. Each formulation has different properties regarding application methods, ease of handling, and efficacy. Label instructions. The herbicide label provides crucial information, including application rates, timing, recommended plant species, and safety precautions. Adhering to label instructions is vital for effective use and regulatory compliance. You'll hear regularly in the pesticide industry that the label is the law and it should be followed at all times. Weed life cycle. Weeds can be classified based on their life cycles, annual, biennial, or perennial. This classification influences herbicide selection, as timing and application methods may differ depending on the weed type. When it comes to herbicides, you always have to be aware of herbicide resistance. A growing concern in weed management, herbicide resistance occurs when certain weed populations evolve to survive applications of specific herbicides. Understanding the mechanisms of resistance is critical for developing effective management strategies. Environmental persistence. This refers to how long a herbicide remains active in the environment. The persistence of herbicides can affect subsequent plant growth and the overall ecosystem, impacting the choice of herbicides for different situations. Growth, phases, and stages. Effective weed management considers these factors, choosing herbicides based on specific plant types, the targeted growth stage, and environmental requirements. Types of absorption. Foliar versus root absorbed. Herbicides can be categorized based on their absorption methods, primarily as foliar absorbed or root absorbed. Foliar absorbed herbicides. Foliage absorbed herbicides, also known as post-emergent herbicides, target plants after they have emerged from the soil. These herbicides are sprayed directly onto leaves and absorbed through the plant surface. Commonly used foliar absorbed herbicides include 2,4-D, a widely used herbicide for controlling broadleaf weeds, especially in turf and crop areas. Diquat, a fast-acting contact herbicide effective on many annual and perennial weeds. Glyphosate, a systemic herbicide used to control a wide range of weeds and grasses, highly effective when applied to actively growing plants. Phosamine, crenite, a systemic herbicide often used for controlling woody plants and brush, and tricloper garland, effective for controlling woody plants and some herbaceous plants, especially in forested areas. Foliar absorbed herbicides. Foliar absorbed herbicides are applied to the leaves of plants where they are absorbed and translocated throughout the plant. Understanding how these herbicides work can help practitioners effectively control target weeds. Mechanism of action. Once absorbed, foliar herbicides move through the vascular system of the plant. They may disrupt various metabolic processes leading to plant death. For instance, glyphosate inhibits the shikimic acid pathway, which is essential for producing amino acids in plants, effectively starving the plant of necessary nutrients. Application timing. The timing of application is crucial for foliar herbicides. Applying them when the target plants are actively growing ensures optimal absorption and efficacy. For example, applications during flowering or early fruiting stages may be less effective. Weather conditions. Environmental conditions significantly impact the performance of foliar herbicides. High humidity and temperatures within the recommended range can enhance absorption, while excessive rain immediately after application can wash away the herbicide, reducing its effectiveness. Root-absorbed herbicides. Root-absorbed herbicides, or pre-emergent herbicides, are applied to the soil and absorbed through the plant roots. They work by preventing weed seeds from germinating or establishing. Examples include Bromacil hyvar, a residual herbicide effective for controlling various annual and perennial weeds. Diuron, effective for controlling broadleaf weeds and some grasses in industrial sites and rights-of-way. Arizalin, Surflon, a pre-emergent herbicide primarily used in landscape maintenance. Tibethurion spike, often used in areas requiring long-term control of brush and weed populations. Annual grasses, root-absorbed herbicides variables. Soil mobility. The effectiveness of root-absorbed herbicides depends on their mobility in the soil. Some products are designed to stay close to the soil surface, targeting germinating seeds, while others may leach deeper into the soil profile. Persistence. The persistence of these herbicides is critical in managing weed populations over time. Products with long-term residual activity can suppress multiple weed generations, but this must be balanced with the potential impact on desired plant species. Application techniques. Proper application techniques, including soil incorporation, are vital for ensuring that root-absorbed herbicides reach the target zone in the soil. Techniques such as banding or spot applications can help minimize non-target exposure. Dual-absorbed herbicides. Some herbicides can be absorbed through both foliage and roots, increasing their application versatility. Clopyralid transline, primarily used for controlling broadleaf weeds, especially in pastures and roadsides. Clopyralid transline, primarily used for controlling broadleaf weeds, especially in pastures and roadsides. Hexazenone felpar, effective against a range of weeds, particularly in forest management. Imazapyr arsenal, a systemic herbicide effective against many woody and herbaceous plants. Picloram tordon, used to control tough weeds and woody species, particularly in non-crop areas. Sulfametron oust, commonly used in managed forest and rights-of-way. Selective versus non-selective herbicides. Herbicides can also be categorized as selective or non-selective based on their target plants. Understanding the difference between selective and non-selective herbicides is crucial for effective vegetation management. Selective herbicides are designed to target specific plant types while leaving others unaffected. For example, certain broadleaf herbicides target auxin receptors that are more prevalent in broadleaf plants than in grasses, allowing them to control broadleaf weeds without harming grass species. Examples of selective herbicides include 2,4-D targets broadleaf plants while leaving grasses relatively unharmed. Dicamba targets broadleaf weeds while leaving grasses unharmed, often used in conjunction with glyphosate-resistant crops. Metsulfuron methyl, escort, selective for many broadleaf weeds, especially in grass crops. Tricloper, effective against woody plants, particularly in mixed vegetation areas. Application considerations. Proper timing and application techniques are essential to ensure selective herbicides effectively control target species without harming nearby desirable vegetation. For instance, late spring applications may effectively control certain annual broadleaf weeds before they set seed. When we look at non-selective herbicides, they are going to be particularly useful in areas where establishing new vegetation is the goal, as they kill all plant material present. Strategic use. Non-selective herbicides are often employed in non-crop areas, such as along roadsides, industrial sites, and construction zones. Proper use involves understanding the surrounding vegetation and timing applications to minimize collateral damage. Examples include glyphosate, known for its effectiveness against a wide variety of weeds, including grasses and broadleaf species. Bromacil, useful for total vegetation control in non-crop areas. Tibuthiurin, often applied in forestry and rights-of-way for broad-spectrum control. And paraquat, a contact herbicide that provides rapid control of emerging weeds. So we would be amiss if we didn't talk a little bit more about glyphosate. Glyphosate has been in the news a lot here lately. You've probably heard a lot of things about lawsuits and things like that when it comes to products like Roundup. Glyphosate is an herbicide commonly used to kill certain plants and grasses. It also manages how plants grow, gets crops ready for harvest, and ripens fruit. It's classified as a non-selective herbicide. This means it kills most plants to which it's applied. It works by stopping plants from creating certain types of proteins that enable growth. Especially for purposes of this course, we want to talk about glyphosate herbicide uses. Glyphosate has many different uses. It's used everywhere from home gardens to big agriculture. Many farmers use it during food production. It's often used on fruit and vegetable crops, glyphosate-resistant crops, such as canola, corn, cotton, soybeans, sugar beets, and wheat, plantings, lawns, greenhouses, aquatic plants, and forest plantings. That leads us to another important question I think we need to ask in today's environment. Does glyphosate cause cancer? The reason why I'm including this is because everywhere you go, if you turn on the TV or the radio, you hear about products like Roundup and how they contain glyphosate and how it can cause cancer. You even see all these lawsuits and different things. So I feel like in a lot of pesticide applicators' minds, anybody putting out herbicides or pesticides, they're concerned about these products and their ability to cause cancer. So I wanted to land the plane on something by saying the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, in the U.S. says that glyphosate is not likely to cause cancer in humans. I think that's a big deal. I feel like a lot of people have this major concern, and what you see on TV is almost reality. So you're thinking, if I'm putting this product out, there's a good chance if it contacts my body or if I'm coming into contact with it, however, I could get cancer. The reality is, according to the EPA, there is a concern about other ingredients in Roundup as they may be more toxic than glyphosate. These other chemicals are not the active ingredients in Roundup, so they are rarely the focus of regulatory health risk assessments. One study found that Roundup was among the most toxic of the herbicides and insecticides tested. Think about what we're saying here. The reality is that when you look at a product like Roundup or anything that contains glyphosate, the EPA says it's not likely to cause cancer. At the same point in time, you will see studies that show that these types of products can be among the most toxic of herbicides and insecticides tested. The point being made here is you need to follow the label and you need to wear the correct PPE. If you're following the label on products and you're wearing the correct PPE, the chances of you being exposed to these products is very, very low. There's a reason why so much time, effort, and research goes into making a label and making sure you're protected from a product. If we don't do our due diligence and wear the correct PPE and follow the label, then definitely we're putting ourselves at risk for exposure, and we're also putting the environment around us at risk. So make sure to always follow the label, which is the federal law, and make sure you wear the correct PPE for your own protection so you don't have to worry as much about what the product might do. Just don't let yourself become exposed to it, and then you're not going to have to worry as much about the toxicity of the product. Translocated herbicides do move. They move into the xylem, which is mobile herbicides, move up into the plant, and into the phloem, mobile herbicides move up and down in the plant. Contact herbicides. Contact herbicides target only the parts of the plant with which they come into contact with. These products are effective on smaller or annual plants, but may be less effective against perennials since they may only kill the above-ground portions without affecting the roots. Examples of contact herbicides include glufosinate, phenol, a contact herbicide that acts quickly, causing rapid plant desiccation, paraquat, another fast-acting contact herbicide effective against many annual weeds, diquat, reward, a contact herbicide effective against a variety of annual weeds. Application strategies. To maximize effectiveness, applications should be made under optimal environmental conditions, ensuring thorough coverage of the target plants. This is especially important for dense infestations where complete leaf coverage is necessary. Let's look at systemic herbicides. Systemic herbicides are absorbed and translocated throughout the entire plant, reaching roots and other critical growth areas. This characteristic makes them particularly effective for perennial weeds, as they ensure the herbicide reaches all parts of the plant. This ability allows them to kill not only the above-ground parts, but also the roots, preventing regrowth. Examples of systemic herbicides include 2,4-D, often used for broadleaf weed control. It is absorbed by foliage and translocated within the plant. Glyphosate, a non-selective systemic herbicide that works by inhibiting essential metabolic pathways. Imazapyr, Arsenal, a systemic herbicide that is effective against many woody and herbaceous plants. Tricloper, Garland, particularly effective against woody plants and vines. Timing of application. Systemic herbicides are best applied during active growth periods when the plant is most capable of absorbing and translocating the herbicide. Applications made during flowering or fruiting stages may be less effective, as plants allocate resources differently during these periods. This makes it imperative as a pesticide applicator that you understand the growth seasons for the weeds and plants in your area. If you don't understand the growth seasons, you're not going to be able to hit them in the right stage. So make sure you look at your climate zone, look at the growth seasons, and understand when the best time to hit these plants and be most effective in controlling them is. Persistent versus non-persistent herbicides. Herbicide persistence refers to the duration a product remains active in the environment, influencing its application in various settings. Persistent herbicides. Persistent herbicides provide long-lasting weed control, which is advantageous in areas where frequent reapplication is not feasible. However, their persistence can hinder the establishment of desirable plants in reseeding efforts. Examples of persistent herbicides include Bromacil hyvar, known for its long residual activity in soil, providing extended weed control. Diuron, often used for controlling broadleaf weeds and grasses, remaining effective for extended periods. Imazapyr, Arsenal, provides long-term control of various woody and herbaceous plants. Tibathyurin spike, effective for long-term management of unwanted vegetation. Non-persistent herbicides. Non-persistent herbicides break down quickly, making them more suitable for short-term weed control without long-lasting effects on the soil. Examples include glyphosate, a widely used non-selective herbicide that degrades quickly in the environment, making it suitable for annual weed control. Fosamine, crenite, non-persistent, allowing for replanting soon after application. Tricloper, garland, primarily used for controlling woody plants with minimal residual soil activity. Classification by herbicide mode of action. Herbicides can be classified based on their mode of action, which defines how they affect plant physiology. Let's take a look at some modes of action. An example: amino acid synthesis inhibitors, imazethapyr, glyphosate, mode of action, lipid synthesis inhibitors, cyclohexanidiones, mode of action, seedling growth inhibitors, pendimethalin, allachlor, mode of action, photosynthesis inhibitors, atrazine, metribuzin, mode of action, cell membrane disruptors, example would be paraquat, mode of action, growth regulators, example would be 2,4-D, 2,4,5-T, dicamba. Mode of action, pigment synthesis inhibitor, an example would be bromoxynil. Growth regulators. Growth regulator herbicides mimic naturally occurring plant hormones, auxins, but at much higher rates, causing uncontrolled growth that disrupts the plant's vascular system. These herbicides are translocated throughout the plant, leading to cell damage and eventual death. Products like 2,4-D dicamba and tricloper fall into this category, primarily targeting broadleaf plants. Growth regulator herbicides, usually applied to foliage, but can have residual soil activity. Translocated, systemic, generally affects broadleaf plants, but grasses can be injured too. Characteristics. They cause growth abnormalities, such as leaf twisting and epinosty. Many growth regulators are persistent, with some classified as restricted-use pesticides, e.g. picloram. Available in various formulations for different application methods, including emulsifiable concentrates and water-soluble salts. As you can see in this image, in the upper left-hand corner, we're looking at callus tissue formation. In the upper right corner, we're looking at leaf cupping. In the bottom left corner, we're looking at onion leafing. And in the bottom right corner, we're looking at fused brace roots. Amino acid synthesis inhibitors. These herbicides block amino acid synthesis within plants, preventing the production of essential proteins necessary for growth. They are often used for selective control, targeting specific plant species while allowing others to remain unharmed. Products like glyphosate, chlorsulfuron, Tilar, and sulfomaturin, oust, work by preventing amino acid formation, leading to plant death over time. Here's a chart on amino acid synthesis inhibitors, ALS inhibitors. We're going to show the family, the common name, and the trade name. Family, imidazolinones, common name, imazopyr, trade names, arsenal, chopper, stalker. Family, sulfonylurea, common name, metsulfuron, trade names, escort. Family, sulfonylurea, common name, sulfometrin, trade name, oust. These herbicides inhibit amino acid synthesis, which is necessary for the formation of plant proteins. Amino acid synthesis inhibitors often takes days to weeks to see damage. Grasses, stunning, purple tint. With broadleaves, you'll see purpling or reddening of veins, meristem necrosis. Glyphosate you'll see yellowing followed by death. Characteristics: non-persistent, with glyphosate being one of the most widely used non-selective herbicides. Residual effects can occur, particularly with sulfometrin and imidazopyr, which effectively control broadleaf weeds while minimally impacting grasses. Photosynthesis inhibitors. Photosynthesis inhibitors, such as diuron and bromacil, disrupt the photosynthetic process in plants by blocking the conversion of light energy into chemical energy. These herbicides prevent plants from producing sugars, leading to starvation and eventual death. These herbicides are often persistent, providing residual weed control as they remain active in the soil. Let's look at photosynthesis inhibitors. We're going to talk about the family, the common name, and the trade name of each. Our first family of photosynthesis inhibitors is going to be family name of triazine, common name atrazine, trade name is going to be Atrax. Second, our family is going to be triazine, common name sympazine, trade name Princep. Our third family is going to be triazinone, common name hexazinone, trade name is going to be Velpar. Our next family is going to be uracil, with a common name of bromacil, trade name of Hyvar. Our next family is going to be urea, common name diuron, trade name of Carmex. And our final family is going to be urea, with a common name Tipithurian, trade name of Spike. These herbicides interrupt photosynthesis, the process by which green plants convert light energy into food. A little more on photosynthesis inhibitors. Control annual or perennial grasses or broadleaves. They shut down the photosynthetic process. They slow starvation of the plant. The plant experiences a more rapid death due to the production of secondary toxic substances. Injury symptoms include yellowing, chlorosis of leaf tissue, followed by death, necrosis of the tissue. Characteristics: primarily absorbed through roots, but can also be taken up by leaves. Offer long-lasting control, beneficial in environments requiring consistent weed management. Triazines, group herbicides, are photosynthesis inhibitors. Photosynthesis inhibitors, divided into two types: mobile, slow-acting, soil-applied herbicide, pre- and post-emergence, and non-mobile, rapid-acting, foliar-applied herbicides post-emergence, both systemic. Triazines, triazinones, soil-applied, and nitriles, phenylperazidines, benzothiazinones, foliar application, are structurally diverse chemical groups but have similar MOA. These herbicides are effective primarily on annual broadleaves, selective, however at certain rates. Some provide control of grasses as well. Pigment inhibitors. Noflurazone, Solicam, is an example of a pigment inhibitor that affects carotenoid production. This leads to chlorophyll destruction and visible whitening of plant foliage. Pigment inhibitors are primarily used as pre-emergent treatments, preventing young plants from sustaining themselves, ultimately killing them. Pigment inhibitors. Pigment inhibitors cause white leaves in susceptible plants. New growth will not contain the green pigments needed for photosynthesis. Symptoms may be found on the cotyledon leaves and true leaves. White growth may be observed with veins, primarily with zorial, and between veins, primarily with command. Pigment inhibitor herbicides. We're going to talk about the family, the common name, and the trade name of some common pigment inhibitor herbicides. Family: isoxazolinone, common name clomazone, trade name Command. Family: pyridazinone, common name norflurazone, trade name Solicam. Family: not classified, common name fluridone, trade name Sonar. These herbicides cause the green pigments, chlorophyll, in plants to be destroyed. Without chlorophyll, plants cannot photosynthesize and will die. Zoryl, nofluorazone, inhibit carotenoid formation, followed by loss of chlorophyll. New growth is white, sometimes tinged with pink or purple. Zoryl usually follows the leaf veins. Characteristics, generally non-selective, and typically does not impact deeply rooted or well-established plants due to limited soil mobility. Cell membrane disruptors. Cell membrane disruptors such as diquat reward and glufosinate phenol cause rapid plant death by disrupting cell membranes, leading to the breakdown of cellular structures. These are primarily contact herbicides with no systemic action, meaning they only affect the parts of the plant they directly touch. Herbicide mode of action and classification. Cell membrane disruptors. Nonanic acid, pelargonic acid, scythe, post-emergence with no soil activity or uptake, non-selective, contact herbicide, rapid foliar absorption, non-systemic. Let's look at another chart of cell membrane disruptors. We're going to look at the family, common name, and trade name. We're going to look at our first family, Bipyridilliums. Common name is diquat, trade name is reward. Our next family, Bipyridilliums, common name paraquat, trade name gramoxone. Our final family, Diphenolethers, common name lactofen, trade name is cobra. Destroy cell membranes, causing cell contents to leak out and result in desiccation of plant tissue. Let's look at some facts of a cell membrane disruptor. Post-emergent, contact herbicides, little soil activity, activated by exposure to sunlight to form oxygen compounds such as hydrogen peroxide. These oxygen compounds destroy plant tissue by rupturing plant cell membranes. Perennial weeds usually regrow because there is no herbicide movement to underground root or shoot systems. Characteristics. Injury symptoms appear quickly, often within hours of application for diquat. They are most effective on smaller or young plants requiring complete coverage for optimal results. Seedling root development inhibitors. Herbicides such as oryzalin, surflin, and pendimethalin, pendulum, inhibit root growth in young seedlings by disrupting cell division. These herbicides are mainly used for controlling grass seedlings as they prevent germination without affecting established plants. On the current image, you're seeing a little bit of what seedling root inhibitors do. Looking at root growth inhibitors, plant death generally occurs before emergence. Root inhibitors translocate very little, generally stable in upper soil profile. Persistence is herbicide dependent, most effective on small-seeded grass and broadleaf weeds. Merisystemic root inhibitors, inhibition of cell division and the elongation of roots. Dinitroanilines, pendimethalin, Pendimax or Prowl, new H2O formulation, oryzalin, surflin, AS, trifluralin, triflan or trilin, pre-emergence with 1 to 3 months of soil activity, does not leach, forms a herbicide barrier in clay soils, apply before rainfall or shallowly incorporate, controls grasses and small-seeded broadleaves, not translocated in plants. Herbicide mode of action and classification. Meristematic shoot inhibitors, strong inhibitor of mitosis, cell division. Chloracetamides or amides, nipropamide, devranol. Pronamide, curb, apply post-harvest to 1-year-old vineyards. Pre and post-emergence with 1 to 3 months of soil activity, very little leaching, forms a herbicide barrier in clay soils, apply before rainfall or shallowly incorporate. Controls primarily grasses and small-seeded broadleaves, absorbed primarily by roots and readily translocated via the xylem. Environmental and plant factors influencing herbicide efficacy. Several environmental factors play a crucial role in herbicide efficacy, including precipitation, temperature, and sunlight. Our first factor we want to look a little further with is precipitation. Rainfall can significantly impact herbicide movement into the soil. If applied during or just before heavy rain, a herbicide may wash away or not penetrate the soil adequately, reducing its effectiveness. Conversely, dry conditions can hinder the performance of contact herbicides that require moisture for proper absorption. Let's think about it. With today's technology, you can see the forecast well in advance. Now, if you know you got a weather forecast like you're seeing here, where it's going to be very hot and dry for 7 to 10 days, you pretty much know you're in a different weather pattern than if you see something like this, where we're going to have a 100% chance of rain and cooler temperatures. As you can see, timing of herbicide applications is your responsibility as an applicator. Whether you're at a technician level, a certified supervisor, or a certified operator, you're the one making those decisions. You need to really watch the weather and think about what you're doing so you make correct applications at the correct time to make sure they're as effective and as safe as possible. Rainfall timing. Rainfall soon after application can wash away herbicides or dilute them, particularly for foliar absorbed products. Understanding the weather forecast before application is crucial for ensuring herbicide efficacy. It's no stretch of the imagination for somebody to understand you can't put herbicides out while it's raining or right after a rain and expect it not to wash away or be diluted. Those of you that have been in the industry for a while understand that temperature is important as well. Temperature influences herbicide activity and plant response. Most herbicides work best within specific temperature ranges. Extreme heat or cold can slow down plant growth and affect the absorption and translocation of the herbicide. Additionally, high temperatures can increase the volatility of certain herbicides, leading to off-target movement and unintended damage to surrounding vegetation. Soil types are another factor we need to be aware of. When we look at soil type, it also plays a critical role in herbicide absorption and persistence. Compacted, clay-rich soils often retain persistent herbicides longer than sandy, well-drained soils. The organic matter and pH of the soil can affect the herbicide's availability, influencing its efficacy. As you look at our wheel of soil types here, you can see there's a lot of different types like clay soils, loamy soils, peaty soils, saline soils, sandy soils, and even silt soils. And you may want to think back to what I showed a few slides ago where we talked about the weather forecast where it was going to be all bright sunny days. This can be a seasonal thing. In certain areas of the country, you get a lot of bright, powerful sunlight in the summertime, not so much in the fall, the spring, or even the winter. Whereas areas out west in the desert, you may have a lot more days that are sunny, and it doesn't really matter what time of the year because there's not a lot of cloudy days in places like Phoenix, Arizona. So just keep in mind you need to understand the impact the UV rays are going to have. You can even look at the UV forecast. If you go online, a lot of places you'll see a UV index forecast that'll tell you what the UV light looks like over the next few days. Think about plant characteristics. Various plant characteristics affect herbicide absorption and efficacy. Leaf shape, surface texture, e.g. presence of hairs, and the location of growing points can all impact how well a herbicide is absorbed. For instance, leaf structure. The surface characteristics of leaves can significantly affect herbicide absorption. Plants with waxy or hairy leaves may hinder the penetration of foliar absorbed herbicides, requiring higher application rates or alternative methods. Growth stage. The growth stage of the target plant plays a critical role in herbicide efficacy. Young, actively growing plants are generally more susceptible to herbicides. Conversely, mature plants may require higher doses for effective control, and certain herbicides may be less effective once a plant has reached the flowering or seeding stage. Let's talk about the life cycle of weeds. We're going to have three different types. We're going to have annuals, biennials, and perennials. With annuals, they complete their life cycle in a growing season, and they are spread by seed. With biennials, complete their life cycle in 2 growing seasons, reproduce by seed, rosette first year, flower and seed production during the second year, and finally perennials live 3 or more years, reproduce by seed, underground root structures, and/or plant cuttings. Something else we need to think about is root system depth. The depth and extent of a plant's root system can affect its susceptibility to root-absorbed herbicides. Shallow-rooted annuals may be more readily controlled with pre-emergent herbicides, while deep-rooted perennials may require systemic treatments to achieve adequate control. Take a few moments to review the root system depth of some common weeds. Natural defenses. Some plants possess natural defenses that can hinder herbicide absorption. For example, certain species may have thicker cuticles or trichomes that can reduce the effectiveness of foliar applications. Understanding these defenses can guide the choice of herbicide and application methods. Herbicide resistance. The repeated use of herbicides can lead to the development of herbicide-resistant plant species. Resistance occurs when a weed population no longer responds to a particular herbicide, posing a significant challenge for vegetation managers. This can happen through natural selection, where resistant individuals survive and reproduce, increasing the population of resistant weeds. Preventive strategies. To mitigate resistance, managers can implement various strategies, including rotating herbicides with different modes of action, using tank mixtures that combine multiple active ingredients, and integrating non-chemical control methods like mechanical removal or biological control. Regular scouting and rapid response to resistant weed populations are essential for preventing their spread. Maintaining accurate records of herbicide applications, including rates, timing, and targeted weeds, can help track the emergence of resistance in specific areas. Let's talk about the most important herbicide-resistant species. 1. We're going to have rigid ryegrass. 2. Wild oat. 3. Redroot pigweed. 4. Common lamb's quarters. 5. Green foxtail. 6. Barnyard grass. 7. Goosegrass. 8. Kochia. 9. Horseweed. 10. Smooth pigweed. Integrated vegetation management strategies. In vegetation management, herbicides are often part of a broader strategy that aims for comprehensive and sustainable weed control. This integrated approach combines chemical treatments with mechanical control methods such as mowing or manual removal, and biological methods such as introducing natural weed predators. Benefits of integrated management. 1. Reduced herbicide dependency. By incorporating mechanical and biological methods, managers can reduce their reliance on herbicides, minimizing the risk of resistance development. 2. Enhanced ecosystem health. Diverse management practices can promote biodiversity and improve soil health, supporting the overall ecosystem. 3. Cost efficiency. Combining methods can lead to long-term cost savings by reducing the need for frequent herbicide applications. Let's review a little bit about what we're talking here. When we think about reduced herbicide dependency, that's a really big deal. Obviously, you can imagine when we're using less herbicides, we're going to have less impact on the environment. You can see the photo of the green globe here. The reality is we need to incorporate more of these mechanical and biological methods so that we can reduce the reliance on herbicides. Anytime you're putting out an herbicide, you know at some point it's probably going to get carried away from that target site, at least to a point. Now granted, we're watching the weather, we're watching the wind, we're trying to make sure that we're not putting these products out on a day where it's going to rain, or obviously while it's raining. But the reality is, at some point, you still have to think that some of this can get into nearby waterways or non-target areas. We also need to look at minimizing the risk of resistance development. So as you know, when you use the same products over and over again, there's always going to be a risk of resistance. So make sure you're rotating your products. Don't use the same products with the same modes of action over and over again. But again, we need to lower our reliance on these herbicides. It's only going to be better for the environment, also better for you as a company with cost savings and things like that, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. Just looking at topic number 2 on our list here, the enhanced ecosystem health. So again, we have to look at these diverse management practices because we're trying to promote biodiversity and improve soil health. So one of the things we want to do is we don't want to kill non-target organisms, whatever the case may be. A lot of times these non-target organisms are actually healthy and good for the environment. And also we need to look at overall soil health. So the soil itself is very important. And as we put down herbicides and do things like that, it can have an impact on the soil health. The bottom line is we want a good overall healthy ecosystem where the good plants are growing and we're taking out the ones that we don't want there. Now, as I mentioned before on number 3, cost efficiency, I just want to tell you this combining of methods and not just relying on herbicides is really a big thing when we look at cost efficiency. I can't think of anybody who's not cost conscious nowadays. So the reality is when we're using a lot of expensive herbicides and we're having to put in the man hours, buy the products, the labor, when you look at it, there's a lot of costs with this. So we really need to think about how frequently we need to do these herbicide applications by combining these other methods that can help us not have to do that. The reality is companies, whomever's paying for these services, they don't want to pay a lot of money. So how can we reduce the amount of times we have to put out the herbicides, ultimately saving them money? So what I'm looking at when I say this is the fact that we can lower our use of herbicides, we can combine these other methods, and in the end we can save time and money, which is something every business is looking at in today's environment. Integration of IPM strategies in weed management. 1. Utility rights-of-way management. In utility corridors, managers often use a combination of herbicides and mowing. By initially applying systemic herbicides to control woody vegetation, followed by periodic mowing, they can manage regrowth effectively while minimizing chemical use. 2. Forest management. In forestry, integrated approaches often involve using pre-emergent herbicides combined with prescribed burns. The herbicides control competing vegetation, while controlled burns promote the growth of desirable species. 3. Urban areas. In urban landscapes, herbicides can be used alongside manual weeding and mulch applications to control weeds along road shoulders and around trees. This integrated approach maintains aesthetic appeal while ensuring healthy plant growth. And here we go again looking at a combination of techniques to control weeds. Now obviously manual weeding, again, I think is something that can be done, but also there's a cost to that. And then putting down things like mulch can even be great because at that point we're choking the weeds out, we're not allowing them to grow. But one thing these two methods definitely do, they do lower the need for herbicide applications. And no matter how we look at it, the herbicide applications themselves, as I keep saying, are going to be the most expensive, labor-intensive, and ultimately have the largest negative impact on the environment. Native flora. Strategy. They utilized a combination of pre-emergent herbicides and prescribed burns. Herbicides were applied to target invasive species prior to a controlled burn, enhancing the effectiveness of both strategies. Outcome. This integrated approach improved the health of the forest ecosystem, with a noticeable resurgence of native plants in the years following treatment. Regular monitoring ensured that the invasive species were kept in check, explaining right-of-way herbicidal vegetation management program. A lot of times when you're doing herbicidal right-of-way vegetation management, it's important that you explain the program. Let's take, for instance, you're working with a utility company. You might want to put something out like a service announcement that talks about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Something like, we're going to be doing some right-of-way treatments that are going to help with the reduction in encroachments by woody stemmed vegetation on electric distribution lines, potentially leading to reduced numbers and frequency of outages and improved electrical service reliabilities for members. When we think about putting notes like that out, what it really does is it explains to your customers what you're doing and why you're doing it, so you don't have to worry about what people are thinking during that process. Pesticide sensitivity has become a real issue. A lot of states you work in, you're going to see a list of people that are chemically sensitive to pesticides. A lot of times you even have a registry of notification where you have to notify certain people before you can put out a pesticide or an herbicide. So we need to be aware of the fact that people are super conscious to the applications of herbicides and pesticides, and we need to think about it before we do the applications, that we notify people, but also put out there why we're doing it, and then notify the people on these registry lists, because the worst thing that can happen to you is somebody lives on a piece of land that's close to your application area, and then they notice you're putting an herbicide out. Next thing you get is a call from the state, and they're asking if the person was notified, and you can't prove that they were. I've seen this happen, and this can cause a lot of issues, and it can even lead to state fines and violations. For effective weed management. By incorporating environmental factors and integrating herbicide use with mechanical and biological methods, vegetation managers can develop sustainable strategies that minimize herbicide resistance and promote healthy ecosystems. As vegetation management continues to evolve, the ongoing research into new herbicide formulations and alternative control methods will contribute to more effective and environmentally responsible practices. The application of herbicides will remain an important tool, provided it is used thoughtfully with an integrated vegetation management framework. I want to leave you with this. You need to be conscientious, you need to protect yourself, and always consider the environment when choosing to make any herbicide application. You and I are the people out there on the front lines. We're the ones making the decisions on when to use an herbicide, where to use an herbicide, and how to use an herbicide. No matter what position you're at in a company or in your organization, when you have that equipment in your hand, you're deciding on how that application's made. So make sure to be conscientious, make sure to make it at the right timing, and make sure our ultimate focus is protecting the environment around us. The use of trade names in this publication is solely for the purpose of providing specific information or as examples. American Pest CEUs does not guarantee or warranty the products named, and references to them in this publication do not signify our approval to the exclusion of other products of suitable composition. All chemicals should be used in accordance with directions on the manufacturer's label. Use pesticide safely. Read and follow directions on the manufacturer's label.
You have finished Characteristics of Herbicides and Vegetation Management. Please continue to Part 3.
Welcome to American Pest CEU's course on insects and turf. We hope you enjoy the course. This course will cover pest management steps and common turfgrass damaging insects. In this course, you will learn cultural and mechanical methods to control pests before resorting to chemical applications. Turfgrass is cultivated for its aesthetic appeal, recreational use, erosion prevention, and functional purposes. People generally take pride in keeping their lawns attractive and in good condition. Effective care and timely pest control are essential to maintaining a healthy color, thickness, and to keeping turf free of weeds, insects, and diseases. Turf management includes selecting the appropriate grass species, proper mowing, watering, fertilization, and managing thatch. Cultural practices are crucial for sustaining turf quality and preventing issues. While pesticides can assist in management, they are not a replacement for proper care. Pesticides cannot compensate for improper watering, fertilization, mowing, excessive thatch, poor soil, or selecting the wrong grass species. Growth is influenced by factors like climate, soil conditions, management practices, pest control, and choosing species and cultivars suited to the area. Many insects and other arthropods commonly inhabit lawns and turf grasses. Although only a few are harmful, their damage may result in considerable repair and replacement. Proper management is the first line of defense against insect pests. Healthy turf grass is less susceptible to problems than weak turf grass. To manage insect pests effectively, commercial pesticide applicators should possess basic knowledge of insect life cycles and habits and realize it is not possible or practical to eliminate all insects. Good management practices, which include applying insecticides when needed, will reduce turf grass damage. Insects and other arthropods. Insects, spiders, scorpions, millipedes, centipedes, ticks, and mites are arthropods. They have hard external skeletons and segmented legs and bodies. Most insects have 3 main body regions and 3 pairs of legs. They are the only arthropods that can fly. Insect life cycles and growth. Insects grow through a series of changes during their development from egg to adult in a process called metamorphosis. When the insect hatches from an egg, it is either a nymph, gradual metamorphosis, or a larva complete metamorphosis. The immature stage must shed its external skeleton, a process called molting, in order to grow. Lawn beetles go through complete metamorphosis. It's important to note that gravid females lay about 30 to 50 eggs in the soil from October to December. Hatching grubs feed and develop through 3 larval instars. First instars feed on organic matter, second instars feed on roots for 4 to 6 weeks, and third instars feed on roots for 6 to 7 months. Grubs remain in the soil from March to November, feeding on sugarcane roots. For 2-year life cycle, third instar grubs remain in the soil. Pupa occur in the soil from August, and pupal phase lasts up to 30 days. Adults emerge en masse from October to November, mate, and feed on the plant host. Pest management steps. Successfully managing pests requires recognizing problems, taking appropriate action, and making a follow-up assessment. Here are 5 steps to reduce insect pest problems. 1. Inspect turf grass regularly. 2. Learn to identify important pests and their damage. 3. Develop a sound pest management strategy. 4. Select and apply insecticides when necessary. 5. Evaluate the success of the management program. Periodic inspection. To detect insect infestations and accurately assess damage potential, conduct regular, systematic inspections. Examine blades and stems for feeding injury. Check for above-ground insects by applying a mixture of 1 quart water and 1 tablespoon of laundry detergent over a 4 square foot area. 1 teaspoon of pyrethrum can be used in place of detergent. Within 10 minutes, insects should move to the surface where they can be collected and counted. Use this technique in several places to determine the average number of insects present. To inspect for root damage, pull a handful of turf grass. If it can be pulled back easily, the roots have been damaged. If it stays in place or blades detach easily, above ground portions may be injured. To look below ground, cut a 1 foot square section 4 inches deep on 3 sides and roll turf grass back to expose the root zone. Shake soil off the roots to look for grubs or other root feeders. Replace turf grass and water to reestablish root-to-soil contact. Identification. Determine whether symptoms are insect-related. This may not be easy because other factors, fertilizer burn, diseases, improper mowing, turfgrass variety, dry weather, dog or cat urine, or improper insecticide, fungicide, or herbicide use can resemble insect damage. If the problem is insect-related, it is important to determine which insect pest is involved because each pest may require a different control strategy based on seasonal occurrence, life cycle, habits, and damage severity. Correct identification is also important to separate non-destructive insects from destructive ones. For example, some insects may benefit turfgrass because they prey or feed on destructive insects or decaying organic matter, which helps improve the soil. Others may be only temporary and are neither harmful nor beneficial. For example, leafhoppers and clover mites occasionally inhibit turfgrass, but usually do not cause significant damage. Develop a sound management strategy. Once the problem has been linked to an insect, a pest management decision can be made. Determine actual and potential damage before deciding whether to treat with insecticides and how to maximize the effectiveness of the application. Depending on the problem and time of year, insecticide applications may or may not be helpful. Chemical control. Insecticides should not be applied based only on existing damage without first determining whether pests are present in sufficient numbers to cause additional damage. After determining which insecticide to use, apply the insecticide at proper label rate and in sufficient quantity to turf insects, permitting thorough coverage. Some pests may have more than one generation, so repeated applications may be needed. Insecticide should be applied when most susceptible life stages, such as nymphs and adults, are present. Evaluation. Conduct a thorough evaluation to determine whether the application was successful. It may take 2 to 3 days for above-ground insects and 2 to 4 weeks for soil insects to be killed, so do not expect immediate results. If the application was not effective, determine the cause. Thatch. Thatch is a highly interwoven layer of living and dead roots, stems, leaves, and stolons, underground stems, of turfgrass that develops between green vegetation and the soil surface. A thatch layer of more than 1/2 inch may reduce effectiveness of insecticides applied for control of soil insects, such as white grubs and billbugs. Thatch chemically and physically prevents insecticides from moving into the soil where insects are feeding. These effects may be reduced by using granular insecticides or by wetting thatch before applying liquids and then watering heavily 1/2 inch or more immediately afterward. Better results can be achieved by power raking, top dressing, or applying lime. Healthy grass is like a well-balanced diet. Unhealthy grass caused by excessive thatch is the complete opposite. You'll need a dethatcher or power rake for this task. These machines are specifically designed to pull up thatch without damaging the grass. Dethatchers come in all sizes for lawns ranging from postage stamp to large acreage. Rake the thatch and remove it or add it to a compost pile. Insecticide fertilizer mixtures. Insecticide fertilizer combinations fertilize turfgrass and control insects simultaneously. Because fertilizer and insecticides are not always needed at the same time, applying either when it is not needed is not environmentally sound or cost-effective. Some insecticides work better on certain insect pests than others. It is most economical to use the best insecticide for a particular pest only when it is causing problems. Common turfgrass damaging insects. Insects that damage turfgrass can be categorized as above-ground or underground pest. The two groups feed on different parts of the turfgrass and require different control strategies. Above ground pests such as sod webworms, armyworms, cutworms, and chinch bugs feed on turfgrass blades and stems. Insecticide applications should remain on blades and stems to kill insects as they crawl around or feed on the turfgrass. Underground pests, such as white grubs and billbugs, primarily feed on the roots. Insecticides should be applied and watered into the soil about a half inch where the insects live. Among the most damaging turf insect pests are white grubs that feed on or otherwise destroy the root systems of grass plants. They are the larval stage of one or several species of beetles, mast chafers, May or June beetle, and Japanese beetles when they get here. White grubs are robust, white, C-shaped larvae with many wrinkles or folds along the body and behind the head. The abdomen is slightly larger in diameter than the rest of the body and may appear darker in color as the grub ingests soil. White grubs have chestnut-colored, hardened head capsules and 6 legs. Depending on species and age, they may range from 1/4 to 1 1/2 inches in length. White grubs are most damaging in their later instars when they can destroy large amounts of turfgrass root material. Larvae burrow below the freeze line to overwinter, then return to the root zone to resume feeding in the spring. Depending on the species involved, grubs may feed for a single year or several years. The most common pest species feed only for 1 year and are referred to as annual white grubs. The first symptom of white grub damage is a wilting and discoloration of the turf. Eventually the turf collapses, forming irregular dead patches. Damage is usually noticeable during late summer or fall, but may sometimes be detected in the spring. Other symptoms include sod that pulls up easily, like rolling back a carpet, revealing white grubs underneath. Sometimes raccoons, skunks, or flocks of blackbirds foraging in the lawn may indicate a severe grub infestation. The destructive foraging activity of these animals can sometimes cause more damage than the grubs themselves. Drought often manifests grub damage to turf, and minor damage can sometimes be masked by increasing irrigation. Once grub damage becomes severe, insecticide treatments will not usually save the turf. Consider an insecticide treatment where there is evidence of a large grub population and damage is likely to occur or worsen. For most white grub species, traditional recommendations call for insecticide applications in late July or early August. However, modern chemistries with longer residual activity permit applications earlier in the summer where the turf has a history of serious grub infestation. Above ground pest, bluegrass sod webworm. Infestations often damage bluegrass or mixtures of bluegrass and tall fescue. This webworm attacks bentgrass, golf course greens, tall fescue, and occasionally Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass usually grows vigorously enough to minimize serious problems. Description and life cycle. Sod webworms are the caterpillars of lawn moss. Moss, adults, are small, 1/2 inch long, and whitish gray. At rest, they hold their wings close to their bodies with mouth parts projecting forward like a snout. Moths usually are noticed when flushed out by a lawnmower or people walking. When disturbed, they fly in a jerky, zigzag pattern and quickly return to the turfgrass to hide. Around dusk, females may be seen flying a few feet above the turfgrass and dropping eggs. In a few days, eggs hatch into small caterpillars that damage turfgrass. Caterpillars, larvae, generally have dark heads and rows of light brown spots arranged in rings around greenish-gray bodies. They live near the soil surface in silken shelters covered with turfgrass, with webs created from thatch woven into a mat. Larvae clip grass blades close to the ground and pull them into the silken runways. Most feeding occurs while webworms are protected. After several weeks, mature 3/4 inch larvae change into pupa and emerge as moths. 2 generations occur each year. First generation adults appear in June, and second generation adults in late July and August. Months may vary by location. Sod webworm larvae grow to approximately 1 inch in length. They are tan or dusky green with distinct dark spots over their entire body. The larvae often hide in silk-lined tunnels within the thatch. They feed on leaf blades and stems of a variety of turfgrass species, especially well-maintained turf in sunny locations. Although extensive feeding can cause thinning turf and brown patches, damaged areas usually recover. First instar sod webworm larvae are leaf skeletonizers. Later instars notch or cut off leaf blades and pull them into the burrow. Heavily infested turf, more than 100 square yards, quickly appears moth-eaten with irregular patches of brown grass or bare areas. Significant damage can occur on drought-affected bluegrass and on bentgrass, green, and tea areas. Damage and detection. Close clipping by sod webworm larvae does not kill turfgrass directly, but exposes the crown to excessive sunlight. Damage is worse during hot, dry weather. As the caterpillar grows, it can damage an area of turfgrass about the size of a softball. If the infestation is severe, spots may enlarge. Webworm feeding damage symptoms may be confused with other causes of spots. These include fertilizer burn, diseases, improper mowing, grass variety characteristics, dry weather, cat and dog urine, improper pesticide use, or damage associated with underground feeding of insects such as white grubs or billbugs. If lawn moths are abundant, watch for caterpillar feeding over the next 7 to 14 days. An abundance of moths does not necessarily mean that damaging larval populations will develop. Another sign of a sod webworm infestation is the presence of large numbers of birds, particularly starlings that peck holes in turfgrass looking for caterpillars. Often caterpillars can be found feeding at the periphery of a damaged area. Look for green fecal pellets and webs covered with clippings in the thatch near the soil line. Apply a detergent or pyrethroid insecticide mixture. Count the number of larvae present. If fewer than 8 caterpillars are found per square foot, insecticide treatment is probably not warranted unless turfgrass is highly stressed. Healthy turfgrass may tolerate more webworms because it has a much better chance of recovering from feeding. Chemical control. Insecticide applications should be considered when 2 to 4 webworms per square foot of sod are detected. Mowing turfgrass before applying insecticide will minimize the amount of post-spray contact. Using a grass catcher to catch clippings will reduce the amount of insecticide intercepted. One method of timing spray applications is to apply the insecticide 7 to 10 days after moth numbers peak. Treat to control first-generation larvae in June, but only if necessary. High moth numbers do not necessarily translate into a serious problem with larvae. Lawns are often treated unnecessarily to suppress first-generation larvae. This is especially true of pure fescue turfgrass. To avoid over-application of insecticides, initiate a routine inspection program to detect damage. Apply insecticides only when infestations have been confirmed. Use enough water to thoroughly moisten turfgrass and thatch, but not to the point of runoff. After applying an insecticide, irrigate lightly to move material to the turfgrass crown. Avoid irrigating heavily for 2 days. When using a granular insecticide, apply 1/2 to 1 inch of water within 24 hours of treatment. Do not mow afterwards. Check the label to determine the minimum interval between applications, which will vary depending on the application rate. Even if the first generation was treated, another application may be necessary to control the second generation. A late July or August application may be needed because many insecticides applied for the first generation work only from 1 to 4 weeks. Moths from untreated lawns in the area may reinfest turfgrass by laying eggs for the second generation. A post-treatment evaluation should be done to determine whether the insecticide was effective. Children and pets must be prevented from entering treated areas until sprays have dried. Check the label for other precautions. Clean all equipment after use and store insecticides in areas not accessible to children. Other chemicals. Removing thatch in autumn will destroy overwintering eggs and prevent populations from building up the following season. Buffalo grass sod webworm. The buffalo grass sod webworm is a pest in western Kansas with a different life cycle and biology than the bluegrass sod webworm. Description and life cycle. Adults are about 3/4 inch long and light to dark brown. They are active at dusk and reside in turf grass during the day. Mature caterpillars are about 1 1/4 inches long. They have a light brown head and light brown spots arranged in rings around grayish bodies. In the spring, caterpillars that overwintered begin to feed on buffalo grass. During the day, caterpillars live in an extensive silken runway near the soil surface. They rarely leave this protective habitat and extend the system laterally to access new grass blades, which are severed and pulled into the habitat for eating. Caterpillars feed throughout the summer and pupate in August. Female moths do not fly readily, so they usually lay eggs in short buffalo grass or bare areas close to where they emerge from the pupal case. After they hatch, the small caterpillars find secluded places in the soil near the roots of turf grass to spend the winter. There is 1 generation per year. Damage and detection. The first signs of damage are spots with leaf blades missing and silk tubes across the soil surface. Heavy infestations may result in spots exceeding 10 feet in diameter. Pulling on infested turf grass may not remove roots because the damaged stems break off with little resistance. The loss of leaves defoliation exposes turf grass stems and possibly the crown to sunlight. Damage is much more severe during hot, dry weather, on berms, or elevated locations. Chemical control. Implement control measures when there is 1 defoliated spot per square yard of buffalo grass. Buffalo grass sod webworm caterpillars cannot be detected using the water detergent mixture because they hide in tunnels near the soil surface. Buffalo grass sod webworm caterpillars are difficult to control using insecticides labeled for sod webworms. Apply insecticides in mid-May to kill the young caterpillars as they gather food at night. 2 applications may be needed, with the second application 10 to 14 days after the first. To determine if the insecticide application was effective, crouch down when the turf grass is dry a few days after treatment and look for dead webworm larvae. A large number of larvae that receive a fatal dose of insecticide may leave the webbing and die. If no dead larvae are found and large numbers of live larvae are present and doing damage 1 week after treatment, check the label to determine if the insecticide was properly applied using sufficient water volume. If there were no issues with the application technique and the weather was not rainy or cool, some insecticides are not effective when applied during cool temperatures, it may be necessary to use another product or consult with your local extension agent. Cutworms and armyworms. Description and life cycle. Cutworms and armyworms are the caterpillars of several species of night-flying moths. Cutworms are plump, smooth, and often greasy looking. Cutworms typically curl up tightly when disturbed. They have green, brown, gray, or striped bodies up to 1 3/4 inches long. Although about the same size, armyworms differ in appearance. True armyworms are plump, sparsely haired, generally green to brown larvae with dark stripes down the sides and back. In contrast, fall armyworm larvae have more conspicuous, longer hairs located on definite, black tubercles and an inverted Y-shaped suture located at the front of the head. These caterpillars feed on the above-ground plant parts of many turf grasses and are a pest of many garden and field crops. Cutworm larvae are typically noticed early in the growing season, or not until late summer when subsequent generations begin feeding. Adult cutworm and true armyworm moths appear between April and July, whereas fall armyworms may not be present until late July. Females lay about 500 eggs on the lower leaves over a 2 to 3 week period. Caterpillars usually remain hidden during the day and feed at night. A second or third generation of cutworms may emerge in the summer and early fall. The caterpillars stop feeding and seek concealed areas to spend the winter. Damage and detection. Cutworms feed on blades and cut plants off near the soil surface. Grasses appear ragged and may turn brown from the feeding of these larvae. Damage is more likely if the lawn borders large, untended fields. Armyworms, in particular, seem to be attracted to areas of lush vegetation. When vegetation in nearby areas has been removed and caterpillars are forced to seek new food, inspect turfgrass more frequently. If cutworms are suspected, check damaged areas several hours after dark. Depending on the species, larvae may feed on plant foliage near the crown. Damage near the crown is much more serious than simple foliar feeding. Chemical control. Insecticides may be used to control both cutworm and armyworm larvae. Carefully evaluate the infestation by assessing the damaged area to determine larval density. Apply insecticide near dusk. Both liquid and granular formulations can be used. Read the label and follow procedures. Chinch bugs are common in zoysia grass but seldom cause significant damage. Occasionally they feed on Bermuda grass and bluegrass. Description and life cycle. Chinch bugs remove plant fluid from turf grass blades. They are about 1/8 inch long, black to gray in color with white markings. Large numbers may develop and remain unnoticed for some time until damage is evident. Adults overwinter in bunch grasses and feed on various other grasses in the spring. Females lay about 200 eggs over 3 to 5 weeks. After eggs hatch, nymphs begin feeding. A second generation occurs in the summer. As nymphs mature, a white waistband becomes noticeable. Big-eyed bugs, which are predators, may be mistaken for chinch bugs, resulting in an unnecessary application of insecticide. For more information on natural enemies, contact your local extension agent or university. Damage and detection. Most damage is caused by red nymphs that remove plant fluids from zoysia grass. Chinch bug feeding causes yellow patches, usually located in sunny areas. A distinctive odor similar to vinegar may be noticeable. Chinch bugs concentrate feeding efforts at the edge of dying patches of turf grass. They thrive under hot and dry conditions and may be killed by a fungus in wet weather. During hot and dry weather, 5 to 10 chinch bugs per square foot may weaken zoysia grass and reduce disease resistance. On warm days, inspect turf grass for chinch bugs in the morning. They typically enter cracks in the soil at the edges of sidewalks, driveways, and curbs in the afternoon. A coffee can be opened on both ends and can be used to monitor for chinch bugs. Insert the can into the turf grass at the edge of a damaged area and fill with water. Chinch bugs will float to the surface. The detergent method or can be used. Close inspection should be conducted when initial signs of damage are observed. Insecticides can be used against chinch bugs. Application timing, coverage, and frequency are important. Water before spraying to enhance the movement of the insecticide to the target site. After applying the insecticide, water enough, about a ½ inch, to move the insecticide into the thatch layer where most chinch bugs are located. To prevent insecticide from leaching down below the zone where chinch bugs reside, do not overwater. Follow label directions to determine application rates. Do not re-enter the treated area until turf grass has dried. False chinch bug. The adult false chinch bug is slightly less than 1/4 inch long. It has a black body, brown to reddish yellow legs, and white wings with triangular black areas midway back along the outer margins. Early instar nymphs are red with a white band across the body. Later instar nymphs bear the same characteristic white band across the body but are darker in color. False chinch bugs feed on a variety of weedy mustard species and are often mistaken for turf pests. As mustard weeds dry down in the early spring, the false chinch bug will migrate in large numbers to anything green, usually turf. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts and may withdraw sap from the turfgrass plant. Chinch bugs prefer hot, dry conditions and often feed in groups where the turf is under stress from drought. Their feeding results in the destruction of plant vascular tissue, causing the plants to die in a top-down fashion. The presence of large numbers of chinch bugs during hot, dry conditions may warrant an insecticide treatment. Such treatment should be targeted to penetrate the turf canopy and may be lightly irrigated to facilitate movement into the thatch. Ants. Description and habits. Ants may be red, yellow, brown, or black and may be winged or wingless. They have narrow waistlines and elbowed or bent antennae. Ants are 1/32 to 1/2 inch in length, depending on the species. Colonies or nests are usually located in the soil alongside a foundation or in the yard. Occasionally the nest may be under a concrete slab or in the crawl space of a house. Ant colonies include a queen, workers, soldiers, eggs, legless larvae, and pupa. Worker ants attend the queen and forage for food, while soldiers protect the colony from predators. When foraging, ants may enter homes inadvertently. Infestations in homes may be associated with turfgrass located close to the foundation. Damage and detection. Ants build nests in the ground and form mounds around nest openings. The unsightly mounds make it difficult to mow turfgrass and sometimes smother a portion of the surrounding turfgrass. In addition, turfgrass stands may be weakened by ants that feed on the seeds and roots of turfgrass. Chemical control. Insecticides are available for ant control. For home use, bait formulations are the most effective and less harmful to children and pets. Mowing before applying an insecticide exposes more of the mounds and minimizes the need to enter the treated area sooner than necessary. Apply spray or granules to ant mounds, then water thoroughly. Exclude pets and people from the area until turfgrass has dried. Underground pest, white grubs. White grubs refers to the larval stage of a number of very destructive insect species. May beetles or June bugs, also known as Phylophagia, southern mass chafers or Cyclocephala, and black turfgrass Adaenius. Description and life cycle. Adults vary from light brown to nearly black. Foliage feeding occurs at night from April through June. Many trees and shrubs are also attacked, but usually damage is inconsequential. Females deposit eggs in turfgrass during the day. Eggs hatch within 3 to 4 weeks into small grubs. These grubs are C-shaped and vary from white to light brown. They have brown heads, 6 legs, and a dark area on the abdomen or hind end. Mature white grubs are up to 1 inch long. Billbug grubs are similar in shape but white, legless, and smaller. In the fall, they again burrow down below the frost line to overwinter. Third-year feeding stops by mid-June when a pupal cell is formed. Adults emerge from pupa in July and August but do not appear above ground until April or May of the following year. The southern mass chafer has become a common pest of turfgrass, especially turf with heavy thatch accumulation. This insect has a 1-year life cycle. Eggs are laid in July and hatch into grubs in early August. Grubs do the most damage to turfgrass during August and September. By mid-October, grubs have moved down into the soil to form cells for overwintering. In April, grubs migrate upward again to feed on roots. Unless numbers are excessive, turfgrass damage may be minimal. Pupation occurs in May, and adults emerge in late June through early July. Damage and detection. Damaged turfgrass may wilt, turn brown, and die even under conditions of minimal water stress. Turfgrass can be pulled with minimal resistance, and a section of sod can be rolled back like a carpet because the grubs have substantially damaged the roots. C-shaped grubs may be present in the area. Although damage may be difficult to detect, infested stems may have tunnels caused by small billbug grubs. Grub-infested turfgrass often attracts skunks, raccoons, and birds, which feed on the grubs. In addition, these vertebrates may destroy turfgrass in the process of searching for grubs. Inspect the root zone for grubs if dead areas appear in August or September. Other types of damage that can be confused with grub infestation include fertilizer burn, diseases, improper mowing, dry weather, spots caused by dog or cat urine, improper pesticide, insecticide, fungicide, or herbicide use, or damage from above-ground insect feeding, sod webworms, or cutworms. Chemical control. Insecticides are available for white grub control. They should be applied before eggs hatch because young grubs are more susceptible than mature or older grubs. 3 or more grubs per square foot may justify applying an insecticide. 8 to 10 grubs per square foot usually results in severe turfgrass damage and warrants treatment. Treatment thresholds may be helpful in determining when to apply insecticide. If turfgrass is monitored, these levels should never be reached. When they are, multiple applications of an insecticide are required. To control or regulate annual white grub populations, larvae, of the southern mass chafer, apply insecticides when grubs are small and feeding in the upper 2 inches of the soil. Insecticide applications will be most effective 3 to 4 weeks after peak adult flight. Infestation levels may vary depending on environmental conditions, such as temperature, moisture, and soil conditions, dry versus wet. Turfgrass damage is more pronounced during late summer, August through September, as grubs increase in size and populations. Successful control is possible if insecticides are applied in early August. In some situations, applying insecticides preventatively by mid to late July may increase effectiveness. Before applying an insecticide, be sure to remove thatch so treatment will penetrate the root zone where grubs are located. Do not treat annual white grubs early to midsummer because only adults are present at this time. If the problem is caused by phylophagia grubs, 3-year grubs known as May beetles or June bugs, the treatment period is less well defined because grub age may be an important factor. Active feeding can be expected throughout the season if Phylophagia spp grubs are less than an inch and in the second calendar year of their life cycle. May beetles or June bugs require 3 years to complete their life cycle. Grubs feed on roots, then tunnel below the frost line to overwinter. In the spring of the second year, grubs migrate to the root zone and resume feeding. Turfgrass may be severely damaged during this time. Insecticide applications may be effective from mid-May through September. If most 3-year grubs are an inch or more, they are probably in the 3rd year of larval development. This means that damage should be minimal by mid-June. Insecticide should be applied before substantial damage is noticeable. Billbugs may infest zoysia grass and have also been found in Bermuda grass and bluegrass. Description: billbugs are dark-colored weevils approximately 1/4 inch long. Their antennae are attached at the base of an elongated snout, which serves as a prominent feature for identification. The adults overwinter in protected areas in soil or leaf litter. In the spring, females lay their eggs inside the stems and above-ground shoots of various turf species. Legless, white larvae emerge from the eggs and begin feeding inside the plant stems. As the larvae mature, they move to the crown and roots where they can kill the plant. Adults are 1/4 to 3/8 inch long with long snouts or mouth parts. They are usually located near stems at the soil surface. Most grubs reach maturity in early summer. Damage from new infestations may be noticeable from August to early September. Characteristic symptoms include the appearance of individual dead plants that first give the turf a spotty appearance. These small spots then begin to coalesce into larger patches of dead and dying plants that easily break away from the soil. Damage is common in newly sodded lawns, on south-facing slopes or swales, and around golf course structures such as bunkers, tees, and greens. Symptoms, which include small patches of brown or damaged turf grass, resemble those of white grubs. Tunnels bored in stems may be difficult to detect. Inzoysia grass, stolons, underground stems, may show signs of feeding and tunneling. Grubs and adults may or may not be present when damage is evident. Most damage occurs when grubs initiate root feeding. To inspect for billbugs, routinely monitor sidewalks, cart paths, driveways, and curbs, as adult billbugs often use these structures to move around and infest new areas. Pitfall traps can be placed in the turf to monitor adult activity, and soil cores can be examined for larvae. When billbug damage is suspected, a tug test can be performed by grasping several damaged, dead tillers and pulling. Plants damaged by billbugs will break off at the soil line with very little force. Chemical control. Insecticides are available for controlling or regulating billbug populations. To control billbugs, apply insecticides when adults and newly hatched grubs are present. Once young grubs begin tunneling into stems, they are difficult to kill with contact insecticides. Insecticide applications may be targeted at either adult weevils during spring or at larvae during summer months, but applications targeting the adults usually provide more reliable control. Insecticides can be applied in July to control grubs that are feeding on roots. To enhance effectiveness, remove thatch, especially if thick. This allows treatment to penetrate the zone where grubs and adults are located. Phototoxicity is the measure of the degree to which a chemical or compound is toxic to plants. This usually results in undesirable injury to plants, causing abnormal growth, discolored leaves, foliar burn, leaf drop, stem distortion, and even plant death. Sensitive plants can be impacted by spray droplets, soil residues, or vapors from herbicides. A pesticide used to control a pest on one plant may leave residues in the soil that will damage or kill another type of plant. Phototoxicity symptoms are similar to those caused by insect damage, plant disease, and response to adverse growing conditions such as insufficient moisture and improper fertilization. For this reason, the exact cause of phototoxicity may not be easy to determine. The active ingredient in a pesticide does not always contribute to the phototoxic effects. Formulation solvents, impurities in the water, using more pesticide than the labeled rate, and poorly mixing spray solutions can also damage plants. Other factors which may contribute to pesticide phototoxicity include high air temperature during and immediately after pesticide application, environmental conditions such as temperature, humidity, and light, excessive rates of pesticide application, too little water, uneven distribution of pesticide, mixing liquids or emulsifiable concentrates with wettable powders, mixing fertilizers with pesticides, the condition of the plants, soil properties such as texture, moisture, pH, and microbial activity, variety and species differences. The phototoxic effects can be minimized by reading and following label directions. A pesticide label may list plants or varieties that are sensitive to the product and is the best guide to whether the pesticide should be used on a specific turf species. Avoid spraying pesticides when drift is likely to occur, as well as using the correct planting times. A field assay can be conducted by treating a few plants with the product to see how the cultivar or species will react. Drift. The proximity of different plants with varying degrees of susceptibility to pesticide damage requires that commercial applicators in the turf category be aware of the problems associated with drift. What is pesticide drift? This is the movement of a pesticide away from its intended target. What causes pesticide drift? Equipment setup, improper nozzle selection, wind, weather, temperature inversions. Nothing is more important than the judgment you make in the field prior to squeezing the trigger. The point we're making here is the fact that you're in control. You're in control of things like your equipment setup. You're in control of selecting the correct nozzle. You're in control of knowing what the wind, the weather is, and dealing with things like temperature inversions. Anybody can look at the weather forecast and see what's going on and make decisions. If it's going to be really windy one day, and you need to make an application with a smaller droplet size, it's probably not a good idea to do that application that day. And think about this, if there's sensitive areas around it, you 100% would not want to do that application that day. So really look at those things, look at the weather. If you see it's going to rain all afternoon and you're out at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, does it really make sense for you to put a pesticide down? Think about it. It may have a couple hours to dry, but then if you're going to get 2 or 3 inches of rain, a lot of it's going to wash away. An important thing you can do with this is read the label and make sure what it says about drying time of the pesticides and things like that. Sometimes the label will say if there's rain imminent in the area, do not put the product out. So lean on the label to help you when making these types of decisions. 2 forms of drift are associated with pesticides. The most common form is drift of the spray droplets or dust particles. This type is directly affected by spray pressure, nozzle opening size, wind velocity, as well as the pesticide formulation. Lower spray pressures will result in larger droplet size and less drift potential. Vapor drift is the drift of a chemical with low vapor pressure or high volatility. Vapors or gases can drift in harmful concentrations, even in the absence of wind. Some pesticide products are volatile and thus capable of vaporizing from soil or leaf surfaces in potentially harmful concentrations. Plants can be severely damaged or even killed by herbicide vapors. In this image, you're seeing volatilization or vapor drift. The product is applicated onto the ground, but then rises back up into the air. Drift can be prevented or minimized by taking certain precautions. The applicator should consider the hazard and toxicity of the active ingredient when several pesticides are available. Select the least hazardous pesticide that will be effective. Use formulations and methods of application that will minimize drift. Use products with low volatility. If possible, select pesticides that are safe for both target and non-target plants. Apply pesticides when wind speeds are low, less than 5 miles per hour, and are blowing away from sensitive areas, e.g. waterways, crops, etc. Use the lowest operating pressure and largest nozzle opening. Keep the nozzles as close to the target or the surface as possible. Do not air blast sprayers and dusters when working near sensitive areas inhabited by animals or wildlife. It may be necessary to plant a barrier around the target plant or remove susceptible plants from the area, such as removing susceptible potted plants from a greenhouse. Pesticide movement can be mitigated by using special precautions when applying pesticides on slopes. Use the lowest label rate of a given pesticide. If possible, establish a buffer zone between the treated area and any sensitive areas. Don't apply pesticides if rainfall is predicted. Avoid irrigating areas following pesticide applications. If possible, avoid applications and pesticides that may lead to groundwater contamination. This image shows us a lot of different things. It shows us a pesticide application, photo decomposition, vaporization, wind drift, precipitation, and runoff. Take a few moments to review this slide. Persistence. Persistence is an important part of pest control because successful pest control requires a knowledge of the persistence period to make subsequent applications. For example, herbicides commonly used for pre-emergence weed control in turf persist for 60 to 90 days, and post-emergent herbicides last from 1 to 2 days to 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the specific herbicide. A persistent pesticide has an advantage for long-term pest control because fewer applications are needed. But issues can develop when applications are made too frequently, causing potential phototoxicity for other plants. The period of pesticide residual activity varies greatly from one class of pesticides to another. Persistence is directly related to application rate, soil type and texture, temperature, moisture conditions, rainfall amounts, and other factors. Commercial applicators must be familiar with the persistence of each pesticide that can be applied to turf, especially where adjacent areas may be affected or where soil is used to grow other plants. Pesticide hazards: preventing groundwater contamination. The potential for groundwater contamination is an important consideration when choosing pesticides. Several products have groundwater advisory statements on their label. These statements advise not to apply these products where the water table, groundwater, is close to the surface and where soils are very permeable, loamy sands. Observe all precautions on the label when using these products. In this slide again, we're introducing the concepts of pesticide application, rain, falling leaves, absorbed soil, bioavailable, plant uptake, volatilization, leaching, biodegradation, and how pesticides get down to the groundwater. Take a few moments to review this slide. Protecting humans, pets, and domestic animals. Turf pesticides often must be applied in areas frequently used by humans, as well as pets and other domestic animals. The pesticide applicator should be aware of hazards associated with this situation. The applicator must prevent humans, pets, and other domestic animals from contacting hazardous amounts of pesticides within the treated area. Follow safety precautions in these situations to limit exposure. The applicator should make sure the correct location is being treated. Animals and humans should be kept from the area during the pesticide application. They should also be kept from the area of potential drift or runoff until the spray residues have dried or the dust has settled. Before treatment, always check neighbors' yards for children or pets that may come into contact with spray drift. Remove toys, pet food dishes, bird feeders, or other items from the application site. Also avoid spraying fish ponds, bird baths, and lawn furniture, as pesticide residues on these articles can be a hazard. Remove all clothing from the area. Make sure all house windows are closed. Observe pesticide label restrictions concerning tolerance for fruits and vegetables. Sweep or rinse away any puddles. Secure all pesticide containers or spray equipment before moving sites. Do not use pesticides when people or pets cannot be excluded during the re-entry period specified on the label. Following good cultural practices is the primary method for managing insect damage to lawns. Growing appropriate grass species for a particular climatic region and providing lawns with proper care are especially important. As we just mentioned, appropriate grass species for a particular climatic region and providing lawns with proper care are especially important. Practices such as irrigating and fertilizing have a major impact on lawn health. Practices such as thatch removal, choice of mowing height and frequency, and providing grass with more light by pruning tree branches are also important in certain situations. Naturally occurring biological control agents, such as predators and parasites, may limit some insect pests. Pesticides should never be applied unless a pest has been identified, is present at damaging levels, and is present in a susceptible life stage. If pesticide applications are necessary, choose IPM-compatible materials that have minimum impacts on beneficial organisms and the environment. We wanted to take a moment to thank the following photographers for their contribution in making this course.
Congratulations, you have completed the program. Please proceed to the exam.